Good morning, everybody. I am in Luke chapter 14. I'll invite you to join me in Luke chapter 14 this morning as we continue thinking about this wonderful Gospel of Luke. That tells us the story of Jesus. It tells us about his life, his teaching, his conviction, his determinations, and that gives us certainty. That's what we're thinking about. How does this give us certainty as we think about the life of Jesus and everything that surrounds it? I want to start this morning as we dive into Luke chapter 14. I want to start by thinking about invitations. In fact, that's kind of the major idea that Jesus presents us with as we begin this chapter. Jesus latches on to the notion of of an invitation and the purpose of an invitation and the expectation that comes with an invitation. You'll notice in chapter 14, verses 1 through 6, Jesus is invited to a dinner. 14, verse number 1, one Sabbath when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him. So he is given an invitation. And from there, he kind of runs with this idea. Notice in chapter 14, in verse number 7, now he told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose the places of honor. And then in verses 12 through 14, Jesus will then turn his attention to the one who's doing the inviting. He said, verse 12, to the man who had invited all of them. And then he ends in chapter 14, beginning in verse 15 through 24. He talks about, in verse 16, a man who gave a great banquet and invited many. And so Jesus really wants us to focus on this idea of an invitation. It occurs to me, at some point we've all been invited somewhere, right? Whether it's to dinner or to some special occasion. Whatever the case, if you're invited somewhere by someone, what's the expectation of an invitation?
Yes.
A reply, yeah. You got to respond to the invitation. If nothing else, you reply and say, hey, sorry, I can't make that date, right? But if somebody says, hey, I would like for you to come to ... You need to answer that invitation, right? You need to respond in some sort of way. If you leave them hanging, at the very least, you're going to have some sort of lack of communication, right? Maybe some hurt feelings there. Worst case, maybe you damage relationships. If nothing else, you let them know, hey, I can't make it. But if you do accept the invitation, what are the expectations that come with that? How do you treat the one who invited you? Yeah, you give them some respect, right? You're gracious to the host. You're thankful. You behave in a way that is proper so that you don't offend the people that you are invited by. And some of this is just social protocol, right? I mean, we all kind of understand when you get invited to a place, you behave a certain way. But as Jesus teaches today, some of this also is a matter of right and wrong. It's how we ought to behave. It's how we ought to think about invitations. There's a way things should be regarding our behavior towards someone who has invited us. And I want to start by thinking about that because I've noticed, especially in our culture, we're very lax, right? Proper manners, proper behavior. People don't really take that seriously. People just kind of do whatever they want. And some of this has lost its impact. But nevertheless, what I hope we see today in our study is that invitations matter to Jesus. How we handle invitations matters to Jesus. And how we respond to invitations matters to Jesus. And ultimately, it matters to God because the punchline, the major parable that Jesus is going to tell right here in the middle of this chapter has to do with an invitation that God has given to us. And he wants us to realize God has invited you to something. And he does not take that lightly. In fact, he expects you to respond to it in some way and to appreciate what he is inviting us to. I want to have that thought in our mind as we begin this morning. Before we jump into the text, let's begin with a prayer. And let's ask God to bless our study. Let's invite him into this time of worship and devotion together. Let's pray. Our Holy Father in heaven, we humble ourselves and exalt you because yours is the name above every other name. You are our maker, our creator, our sustainer. You're the source of our life. Father, so often we neglect to acknowledge these things and we forget just how dependent we are on you. And so we use this time as your people to resettle our attention on you and our need for you and the great love and mercy and compassion that you show towards us in giving us this day, this time, this opportunity. Father, I pray that we would use this time to glorify you, to understand more truly your ways and your desires for us, that we as your people would adopt more and more your way of thinking, and that we would grow together in harmony and unity about the things that are important to you. As we open your word this morning and listen to the words of Jesus, let us see him. Let us hear him. And help us, Father, to understand the things that Jesus is trying to enlighten us to. And I pray, Father, that we would be more conformed to his image because of the time we have spent at his feet this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, beginning in chapter 14 and verse number 1, we have a very specific context. Jesus is invited to a Pharisee's house on the Sabbath day, and it says, and they were carefully watching him. Think about those details that were given. How'd the Pharisees feel about Jesus? Yeah, they didn't like him. We've got that much, right? And they keep coming after him. And how'd they feel about the Sabbath day? Well, that was a point of contention, wasn't it? Something that they kept needling. And they're watching him. So clearly something is going on here, right? I don't know if this is a setup per se, but certainly the context is such that it's not in Jesus' favor. Nick?
And it seems like Jesus is actually being kind of inflammatory. He is goading them.
Sure.
He is trying. He could have chosen a more diplomatic way. He could have healed this lady the other 6 days, but he is intentionally causing them to because he's on a timetable.
That's right.
He's, TikTok. I got stuff to do. I must be about my father's business. He's been doing that since he was 12, and he's got an agenda that has to be fulfilled on a particular day.
Sure.
And it is important that they do their role. He chose Judas, and he chose them, and he chose to go to the tabernacle.
Yeah.
He chose to be inflammatory and to specifically call them out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, I think you read my notes this morning because that's kind of what I was thinking as well when I read this. They think that they've got him kind of put into a corner. They think that they have this plan, and Jesus shows up. Most of us, if we knew, hey, this is a setup, I'm not going to that meeting. I'm not going to your house. But Jesus goes because he's not concerned. He knows that whatever they think they're going to do, they're not going to be able to do it because he's Jesus. But besides that, he has this plan, doesn't he? He has a plan about how he's going to, think about how quickly in this context he gets to say what he wants to say, right? He doesn't just wait around for something to happen. He immediately addresses kind of the awkward elephant in the room and deals with what he needs to deal with. And what's interesting, this is the third section that Luke gives us details about Jesus' interactions with the Pharisees on the Sabbath. And this is the third time that Jesus has been invited to a Pharisee's house for dinner. And like Nick just said, he's kind of sick of playing this game with them. If they're not listening by now, he needs to use some more direct language. And I think this helps us understand, or at least explains, why Jesus takes the tack that he does, right? Because again, Jesus doesn't just blast people for no reason, right? He's been trying these different ways. And I think it helps us to understand, too, their beliefs about the Sabbath, that was a big deal to them, right? The beliefs that they held about Jesus, that was a big deal to them. And handling this and addressing the wrong behavior was a big deal to Jesus. And we need to see that. And he says, I've got to deal with this because this is wrong, whatever they are doing. So he comes into this hostile environment. Look at verse number 2, and it tells us, and behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. He's got this severe malady. Anybody know what dropsy is? I did some research on it, so I'm a Google expert as of this morning.
It is a fluid in connective tissue.
Yeah, so it's something that's very obvious on the person. So if somebody walks up and they have dropsy, they're going to have some swelling, but it's usually indicative of something that much more serious that's going on inside of them, a heart condition or a stomach condition or something. And so when you look at this person, maybe they don't look gross, but you can tell there's something seriously wrong with this person. So Jesus walks into this hostile environment, and here's this person who is suffering from something. And there's no sympathy for this person, right? I don't know if this guy was a plant. I seem to think that perhaps the Pharisees brought this guy in to mess with Jesus because, again, they're watching him, right? They know he's prone to do this kind of healing stuff. Hey, let's put a guy in here and let's get Jesus, right? That's my reading of it. I don't know if that's true. But the reality is, this is a person with a need. And the religious leaders aren't concerned with the needs of this man. They don't address him a single time. In fact, they don't say much of anything here. Probably wise on their part. But they don't address this, man. I think it's easy to overlook the awkwardness of this man's presence because, he's sitting here and everybody can see it. You think about how we would respond to a situation like this. There's usually an awkwardness. There's an awareness about, do we address this? Do we ignore this? What do we do with this guy? But again, the more awkward thing is that Jesus is known for healing these people, these kinds of people. And so this is an elephant in the room, and Jesus speaks up. Look at verse number 3. He speaks up immediately and just kind of handles the elephant in the room. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Now, it says he does this in response. I don't know if they'd had some interaction before this. The text doesn't tell us. Perhaps Jesus just knew their heart because we've already seen that he knows that, right? But Jesus responds and immediately asks, is it okay to heal or is it not? Now, if their plan was to trap him, they have royally failed because he beats them to the punch, right? Because what options do they have here? Jesus says, is it lawful to heal? What options do they have? They can say, no, it's not lawful to heal, and they can look like unsympathetic jerks, right? Or they can say, yes, it's lawful to heal, and then they have to concede everything to Jesus about their beliefs on the Sabbath day. They're in a pickle, aren't they? And they've put themselves here, but more importantly, Jesus has put them in this position because Jesus is trying to cut to the heart. He's trying to expose them. He's always trying to expose the hearts of men. Do you see that about Jesus? That's something that I have grown to gain a lot of certainty about. Every time Jesus met with people, it didn't matter if they were hostile to him or if they were interested in him or if they really wanted to follow him. Jesus is going to cut to the heart and say, why are you here? What do you need to do differently? But especially even to his enemies. Do you see the mercy involved here? Because Jesus, we've already had the Luke 11 passage where he says, you bunch of hypocrites, right? He's blasting them. But even still, what's he trying to do? Don't you see what you are doing? Look at yourselves clearly. When we read the scriptures, we need to understand Jesus is trying to do that to us. Do you see yourself clearly? Or are you just putting on a show? No?
Jesus also isn't trying to find a way around something. Jesus is being true to the law.
That's right.
Being true to he was under the Mosaic law. Yeah. He was being true. We told he did not sin.
That's right.
Under that law. So he's being true to that law. What he's not being true to is their traditions.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is what they're trying to catch him into when they do stuff like that. Before this, we had a woman that was healed on the Sabbath and they attacked him for that. And which is kind of funny that this didn't happen.
Yeah. Doesn't this speak to the...
They like being told they're wrong all the time.
That's touche.
But Jesus is always true. He was always true to the law.
Yeah, that's right. And doesn't this speak, though, to the challenge we have with our traditions? Because sometimes traditions become laws, and that's what happened with the Pharisees. And maybe that's another conversation. I don't want to divert into that too far. But I think I've observed we have traditions that we make into laws, that we hold, convictions we hold so strongly that we miss the things that Jesus is actually saying. And I think that's something that he continued to needle the Pharisees about. Hey, what did God actually say here? How does God actually want you to behave? Because what you're doing it's just not right. That's obvious to everybody, right? We can sit here and we can see that. But when you're the one in the shoes of the Pharisees, that's hard to see. It's hard to see ourselves that clearly. Jessica, you had something?
Yeah. I just think it's interesting that he keeps healing on the Sabbath, because if we remember Sabbath from the Old Law, it's a day of rest, and it's a day of dwelling and being with God and recognizing the good things that we have from God, our reliance upon God. And when he heals that woman, he says she was bound by Satan. And so he views sin and illness as a form of bondage to Satan, right? Those are not good things that our Father wants for us. And when he's healing, he's providing these people true rest.
Yeah.
And the Pharisees they just kind of lost sight, I feel like, of the true purpose of Sabbath.
Yeah, I love that thought. I'd not thought about this from the positive, because obviously Jesus is attacking their wrong perceptions, but he's also giving them some very positive principles. Like the Sabbath had a purpose to rely on God, to resettle your attention on God. And by the way, I am God in the flesh, right? And God gives life, God gives healing, God gives release, all of those things. I'd not thought about that. That's a great thought, though, that Jesus continues to package up. If you want to think about Sabbath properly, this is it. Right? This is how you ought to be thinking about it. So he kind of calls them on the carpet, right? And they find themselves in this situation where they look like fools, right? And they wisely kind of plead the fifth. You know, he asks the question and it says, they remained silent. You know, I was thinking about in chapter 13, there was that ruler of the synagogue who Jesus healed, and he opens up his mouth and he looks really foolish. I wonder if they learned their lesson from that guy and said, we don't want to look like him. They remained silent. But Jesus still makes them look foolish, doesn't he? You know, go ahead, Kurt.
In verse 4 and 6 both, they take option number 3. They don't say anything.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I want you to notice how Jesus handles the situation. What's the first thing he does? So he asks the question, they remain silent. So he takes the man and he heals him, right? And you know, many of the miracles, there's kind of this emphasis on like, wow, Jesus healed this guy. Let's settle on that for a minute. And then Jesus teaches. In this one, it says he healed him and sent him away. It's almost like, I want to understate what's going on here because you guys know I can heal. And you've obviously missed the point of it. So I'm going to heal this man and send him on his way so we can talk about what we actually need to talk about. You guys are being ridiculous. Pay attention to what's going on. And to do this, what does he do? What does he do in verse number 5?
He showed their hypocrisy.
Yeah, their hypocrisy. And how did their hypocrisy manifest itself? What does he say there? Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out? So this rhetorical question, I mean, I was talking to my kids about this yesterday, and I said, hey, you know, if our cat falls into a hole, you know, what are you going to do? Obviously, you're going to help it, right? And Jesus is saying, that's obvious, right? Because God helps. God serves. God's a God of life, right? If your son falls into a pit or some place, you're going to... Obviously, we get that. You see what he's saying to them? You're being inconsistent with how you practice this. There's an inconsistency that has developed. You see some things a certain way, and you see others a different way, and you have a double standard. That's just not going to fly. And your inconsistency, it's wrong. It's ungodly. Daniel?
I think there's so much packed in here, but I'd say overall, this is about Jesus emphasizing himself over the old law. And
Sure.
Really foretelling that transition that's happening. I mean,
That's true.
yeah, it's an interesting question, but it's kind of an irrelevant question in some ways.
Okay.
You know, is it lawful to heal on? Who else could heal any other day of the week? Anyway, I think
That's a great point.
Jesus is the only one who can do it, and Jesus is the only one who can truly save us. And I think that's the overarching message here.
Yeah, that's a great thought.
So much more to think about, but I think ultimately the emphasis is Jesus.
Yeah, well, and seeing how he positioned himself, because I was looking back here at Luke chapter 6, the first time he deals with the Sabbath day, he makes the comment, I'm Lord of the Sabbath, essentially saying, my authority is greater than what you're trying to work with here. And your point is exactly right. Jesus has positioned himself to say, I'm the one you need to be listening to. In fact, as the chapter ends, right, he's going to talk about, if anyone wants to be my disciple, he's got to renounce everything. He's positioning himself in this way that either you accept him whole hog or you're out on Jesus. Right? Because he is that important. This is the John 14:6 principle. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's how Jesus is positioning himself here. And he expected everybody to see that about him. If you don't accept my words based on the power and the authority that I've shown through my works and through my words, you're missing it. You're missing it. You've got to see me. I think great thought. Kurt?
He could have said a person's in trouble or even a friend, but he makes it really personal. He's your son,
Yeah, that's right.
flesh and blood.
Yeah,
Would you not stop and help him regardless of what they do?
yeah. Yeah, that's exactly. And how do they how do they respond to that, right? An honest person would say, you know what, you're right. But the dishonest person doesn't say anything. The dishonest person just continues this certain hardness towards Jesus. You know, we need to appreciate that Jesus knew the hearts of people, right? He knew the hearts of people then, and he knows the hearts of us now. And again, he's always trying to expose us towards greater repentance. Are we willing to accept that or not? I think that's where this really connects with us, because we'd like to think that we're being honest with Jesus, right? But are we truly being honest if we're being inconsistent or hypocritical? You know, he's kind of upping the ante on hypocrisy. Is not just bad. It's ungodly. It's sinful. It separates you from God. It keeps you from what is actually true, what is actually real. Listen, if we want to invite Jesus into our life, he's not going to glaze over these awkward things. He's not going to play nice at the table, right? You see, Jesus, he's in this man's home. And imagine the awkwardness of this. And Jesus is saying, I need to address some things. He's going to rip off the Band-Aid. He's going to expect us to deal fairly with our behavior. And the truth is, we're all a little inconsistent sometimes. If we're being honest with ourselves, we got to deal with that.
Daniel, I think
Yeah.
too, you have to think of the consequences of being silent when you're tested. Because if
Okay.
you don't stand for what is right and speak out,
Sure,
that's a sin against God.
sure.
So the fact that they remain silent, I mean, and sometimes we remain silent,
Sure.
and that's not right. And we have to, I don't say justify, that's not it, but we have to realize the consequences of it. It's a
Sure.
sin.
Well, the truth is, if they would have spoken up, what would have come out of their mouth would have indicted them.
Yeah.
Surely. You know, because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Because God made us that way. And maybe we just need to learn to give into that and let our words expose us and be willing to deal with those things. I see a hand over here. Yeah, go ahead, Cody.
What version are you reading from? It says silent.
This is the English Standard Version.
Mine says donkey or ox,
Okay.
which like takes out to me like that personal level of it
Okay.
being your son, and I was almost more like just a selfish aspect to it of like that's their possession.
Oh, yeah.
It makes them almost like even more hypocritical that they're willing to do it for something that's going to actually affect them versus not doing it for the people that are Jesus.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. In a couple of chapters, Jesus is really going to call out. It's going to say, chapter 16, verse 14, the Pharisees who were lovers of money heard all these things and they ridiculed them. They obviously have this strong sense of possession and this is mine and this is my identity. A lot of stuff is wrapped up in that. And you're exactly right. I think we understand the things that we see as our identity, we hold on to those things, don't we? We treat them differently. Sometimes we lord over them, not realizing our stewardship, not realizing our foolishness with how we handle the things that we've been given. Good thought, though. What version are you reading from? The unauthorized version? New King James. Just kidding. Go ahead, Dennis.
The American Standard, King James, and New King James doesn't use son.
Okay.
It uses the donkey.
Okay. I had not looked into the language of that, but that's an interesting nuance here in the text for us to consider. Yeah, go ahead,
I
Ron.
know it says some manuscripts render it donkey.
Okay.
So there's variation between. some
Okay.
manuscripts.
So,
Some sons are donkeys.
sons are donkeys, yeah. Whoa. And we have digressed. He's not wrong.
If it's talking about a beast of burden, if that's the correct rendering,
Sure.
then the idea is, why wouldn't I heal this man, the son of Abraham?
That's right.
You're donkey.
Yeah.
And you object to me healing people of your own nation.
Yeah. He's done something that's clearly good. Why are we looking at it going, this is terrible, right? It's just a wrong perspective on Jesus. It's a wrong perspective on Jesus. So this introduction really gives way to a series of admonitions to the other people that are invited. You look beginning in verse number 7. Now he told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose the places of honor. And so what are they doing here? These people are coming to the house of the Pharisee and they're saying, I want to sit here next to this guy, or I want to sit in this position because it looks better, right? They're kind of positioning themselves, jockeying for position. As I read this is kind of like a grown-up prom because, this is all about who's who, right? And who gets to sit next to who, right? That was important to them, and it's very obvious here. And I'll just tell you, perhaps we're not as overtly concerned about it in this way, but I think we get caught up in the same mentality sometimes. We do. We name drop people who we feel like give us clout. We align ourselves with certain prominent figures or teachers. We position ourselves with credibility before others. And some of this is for the sake of influence, but some of it is just for the sake of our pride, for our ego. Yeah, John?
Didn't some of his closest followers have the same problem? I want to be on your right and
That's
on your
exactly
left.
right. It's a wrong mentality. Yeah, and that's going to come a little bit later. Who's the greatest among us? Yeah. We want to know where we rank with other people. I think that's a human tendency that we need to be very aware of, that Jesus is going to address here. And so he tells this parable to try to address this. Beginning in verse number 8, he looks at all these people who are invited to the party. He says, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person, and then you'll begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. This is one of the less shrouded parables of Jesus. He's not talking about these are plants and you got to figure out how you relate to these plants, right? He's saying this is you. This is literally what you're doing right now. Has a very obvious application. What is Jesus telling these people with this parable?
Be humble.
Don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. It's interesting how often Philippians 2 just kind of permeates the teaching of Jesus. Don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to, but think with sober judgment. Right? Because isn't that what Jesus did? Although he was equal with God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he humbled himself. What Jesus is teaching us is literally the thing that he's practicing in this moment, who has stepped down out of the glories of heaven to sit at this table, and eventually he'll stoop down even lower to wash some feet. This is the life of Jesus, and if they're paying close enough attention, they would realize what he's saying. The reality is, if you exalt yourself, that's your reward. Right? That's all you get out of it. But worse, you're setting yourself up for shame. You're setting yourself up for failure. But if you humble yourself first, you got nowhere to go but up. Right? Do you have a comment, Jamie? Yeah, go ahead.
In this section here, it talks a little bit about honor. And looking at Jacob Hudgens' book that you recommended doing this study, he talks about that. And one thing that jumps out to Jeff and I is to really think about that honor is something that is given. It's not something that you just show up with. And to kind of think about it's not, he said Jesus noted how they chose the best places, so they kind of walked in with this thought that I deserve this.
Yeah, this is where I belong.
This is where I belong.
Yeah.
And none of us deserve it. Mm-hmm. And honor is something that is given. And if we look at it that way, it becomes so much more precious.
Yeah. Yeah, and who is it that we're trying to get that honor from is the other big question, right? Because these people, it seemed like perhaps they understood some of that, because he does talk about, if you sit in this high place, the person who invited is going to look at somebody else and say, they actually deserve this more, and they're going to put you here. So who are you trying to get that honor from? Because in this situation, they're very clearly trying to get it from one another. They're very clearly trying to say, I want you to exalt me here. And Jesus is saying that's just a practice in futility, right? You're spinning your wheels there, John.
Yeah, people can easily misuse this verse also. They can try to manipulate a situation by intentionally saying, okay, I'm going to go sit in the last place so that when somebody comes in, that's not what he's saying at all.
Sure.
He's saying, like my mom used to tell us kids with 13 kids in her family, and whenever chicken was cooked and we're all lined up to go, she'd look at you and say, don't feel like you have to always go for the white meat. okay? Sometimes, let someone else have the better portion.
That's a parable I will never understand.
But I mean, you read this and you realize it's like when we read about, being kind to somebody who's going to heap burning coals on their head. Well, if that's our motivation.
That's right.
If our motivation is, okay, we're going to do this and try to manipulate because that's what Jesus said, then we've got it all wrong.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think you used a word that I think is so important here. He's after our motivations. This goes far deeper than just the behaviors that are going on here. What are you hoping for from this? Are you hoping for some sort of attention or praise or affirmation of men? I think Jesus speaks profoundly about this in Matthew chapter 6, right? If you're doing it to receive glory from men, you got your reward. But how far is that going to last? Right? You'll have your reward. Are you interested in how you're perceived? Or are you thankful for the invitation? You're excited for what you can do with the opportunity. We've got to be very mindful of our hearts in all of this. And I think that can be easily overlooked in what Jesus is teaching. Brad, you had something?
Yeah, kind of like what John was going through. If you look at their motivation, was basically objectifying other people. Using them as usury for their own gain. Well, how you can do that in both ways, by wanting to get the higher seat, or even like John said, taking the lower seat, or whatever. You see it through the Pharisees, you kind of see it throughout the teachings. Kind of the crux is your motivation towards others. We should never put ourselves in a position to use a relationship with somebody else to benefit us, or look at them as an object to gain.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I'd not thought about it in this section, but I certainly see that in the next section as well when he talks to the man who invited these people. He said, you invite all these rich folks because you want to sit at their table too. And you're using them. They're just trophies in your trophy case. That's really what it is, right? Yeah, I got to sit at this guy's table. I got, talked good about by this fella, right? I got the picture and I got the t-shirt. That makes me feel good. But you're exactly right. What it really reveals is we don't think much about people. All we're concerned about is climbing over them, right? Sitting on top of them. Do we have that sort of attitude? I pray God we don't. But let me tell you, we have natural bends towards self-serving outcomes, don't we? I think we do. We need to recognize the rewards that follow our choices, because it feels good to be praised. It feels good to be acknowledged. But that's your reward. That's your whole reward, if that's what you're after. More importantly, though, it's not divinely given. That's selfishly gained. Going back to Jamie's point, if that's what we're after, that's selfishly gained. And Jesus promises a divine reward for humility. Again, that's really what the gospel is about. That's the gospel message. Everyone who exalts himself is going to be humble. But he who humbles himself, like Jesus, who humbled himself and took the form of a servant, God has now highly exalted him. And he promises the same thing for us. That's a promise that ought to drive our behavior. I like to point out whenever God makes promises or Jesus makes promises, that's really what this statement is, right? If you exalt yourself, you will be humbled. In fact, Peter's going to pick up on this in 1 Peter chapter 5. He's going to say the same thing. God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Jesus had this very divine insight we need to appreciate towards us and God's blessings towards us, but he also has divine insight about the judgment that comes from spoiling invitations through this bad behavior. Right? If you show up and exalt yourself, well, as we'll see from this next parable, God's going to say, you ain't sitting at my table. Not here. That's not what this kingdom is about. And this is true with guests who are invited, but it's also true with the one who does the inviting. You look here in verses 12 through 14, he said also to the man, beginning verse 12, who invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors. Notice the specific kinds of people that are being invited here. He's doing this on purpose. The people that are being invited are people that we like or we're related to or we can somehow get something out of, right? We tend to do that, right? I invite you, you invite me. We both win here in this situation, right? Jesus said, don't do that. Don't do that, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. I want you to take note of that word at the end of verse 12. You be repaid. But when you give a feast, Invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. Because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So he says if you do this, you have your reward, basically. So then how will you be repaid if you invite these other people? What's the blessing in this, really? Because it's not in the present, is it? I mean, you got a bunch of people that are leeching off of you for all practical purposes, right? That's how these Pharisees would have seen it. What's the blessing here? It's knowing. Say it again.
Judgment time.
Judgment time, that's right. It's knowing that you're behaving in the likeness of God. This is godliness. In fact, you know what's interesting? He says here in verse 13 who you're supposed to invite. And when he tells this parable here in just a second, that reflects how God behaves. When God goes and invites everyone, he invites the same people, the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Because this is the divine way we ought to live. This is God's bend towards us. He sees the worst of us and he says, I want you to be part of my kingdom. I want to give you the very best that I have to offer. You are invited, he says. But we're not willing to invite everyone. And we've got to get rid of that mentality in our hearts completely. John?
Do you think he's talking just about the physical realities of people as far as their wealth or their proximity, or do you think he's talking more about spiritual things? Because when you think about someone who is poor or crippled or lame or blind, if you apply that in a spiritual sense, those are the ones that Jesus is addressing around them to show that it's not the people that seem to have it all together. You religious leaders, you scribes, Pharisees, and lawyers that think you know that everything's right, because he calls them out, calls them blind, calls them, all kinds of names. I mean, it seems to me like this has a much deeper meaning than just poor people and people that are infirm.
No, I would agree with you on that. A couple things that struck my mind when you said that. I think about the church at Laodicea who said, we're rich, we've prospered, we have need of nothing. And what does Jesus call them? He says, you're poor, naked, blind, wretched, miserable, right? He uses the same language there. He says, yet spiritually you're destitute. You are, and we ought to regard it in that way. I also thought about James chapter 2, when James wrote about not showing partiality. Somebody comes in, they look like they got it all together. He says, don't show partiality to those people. I think you're exactly right. Again, as you've mentioned before, though, Jesus has layers to his teaching here. I think there is a physical element to it. There's also this spiritual element. We've got to see people for their spiritual condition and their needs and not turn anybody away because of our judgment, because of our pretense, because of our partiality. Slenda?
In this setting, they're the people who are the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind.
Isn't that ironic?
And they cannot repay. None of us can repay the good that when God invites us to feast, none of us can repay that. And it just, you were talking about Jesus and his levels, and it just struck me there.
Well, and consider the irony here that they can't see. Mm-hmm. They think they've invited Jesus, but here's God in the flesh who's come into their house to sit with them. And how much he was willing to give to do that, to subject himself to all of their foolishness. It's a bit absurd. It's a bit absurd, Dennis.
And I think it goes further that we are to be servants to everybody, regardless of how people treat us. Even Jesus, regardless of how people treat us.
That's right. We
do what's right, regardless of how other people are going to act. You be the servant. You be the one helping. You be the one inviting. You be the one reaching out, regardless of how anybody else reacts.
Yeah, and Jesus is modeling just that. It's so easily overlooked that Jesus is literally doing the very things that he's teaching here, and so he's calling them to be like him. Is really what this is about. Shelby?
He's also. It seems like he's also calling them to live by faith in this way of saying, you're not living for this reward now, you're living for this reward later. And he's wanting them to line up more with the people of old that they know of, that we talk about in Hebrews.
Yeah.
But all of these people who lived knowing that they were promised this thing, they would have to wait for it, and they're not going to get it now, and it's not going to be easy. It's not easy to invite people that you might not want to invite or that you're uncomfortable with. It's easier to just invite the people that you know and that are the same as you and whatever, but it's like he's saying, yeah, if you do that, you're going to get it that now, but if you do this, you'll get it later, and he's trying to line them up with righteousness.
That's a great thought. He's giving them a paradigm, right? Think beyond the moment. Think beyond the moment. That's something that I say a lot, but I see that from Jesus time and again. He's trying to stretch us to think longer term. So all of this really is setting us up for the discussion Jesus wants to have about the invitation of God. This is verses 15 through 24 rather. We don't really have time to exhaust all of this, but he tells the story of this parable about a master who gives an invitation, right? He gives this banquet, tells us he invited many. He invited many. But then when he calls and the invitees to come, what do they say? It says they had lots of excuses, right? I bought some land. I bought some oxen. I married a wife. Please have an excuse. I don't have time for this. In other words, I know that you prepared all this, but I just don't want to come. I got excuses. And it tells us here in verse number 21, the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry. Master of the house became angry. Think about that. The language that's used, God is angry because his invitation has been rejected. Now, let me just make sure I properly contextualize this, because Jesus is talking to a group of Jewish people. And this invitation, I think, is specifically talking about God's invitation to Israel and the things that he had prepared them for this moment because of the covenant, because of their history, and because of all the blessings that he had given to them, right? So he's specifically talking to these people. And so we're talking about 1,000 years plus of God setting this up for them. That's what they're supposed to be hearing as they're listening to this parable. You were invited to the feast, and the feast is now, and you got better things to do. I would be angry as well if I were God. I have tried to invite you. But then what does he say? Then the master of the house became angry and said to the servant, go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame. And the servant does this. He says, there's still room. There's still room. And you know what the master doesn't say? He doesn't say, fine, we'll just take what we got. He says, no, I want my house full. I want you to see that the master, God, is upset and angry because his invitation has been spurned. But his desire is, I want my house full. I prepared this to share it with people. And I want people to come. We've got to see the heart of God here. And Jesus is revealing it to us. Go to the highways. Go to the hedges. Everybody, fill up this house. That's what God wants. Compel people to come in, he says, that my house will be filled. That's the desire of God. But I want you to notice how he ends this. He says, for I tell you, none of those men who are invited shall taste my banquet. The invitation is offered to the Jews. And they had everything they needed to know to be able to accept this invitation. And they didn't. And if you reject the invitation that God has, he says there's nothing else. There's not another invitation coming. Now, let me just say this. If all this sounds a bit harsh, Jesus, again, is going to temper this in a couple of ways. The master's urgency and intensity to have people in his house, right? It's not that he doesn't want them there. He does. And he invites them. But on the heels of this, in chapter 15, he's going to tell us some parables about some lost things. Right? Lost coin, lost sheep, lost boys. Thank you, Linda. I always get it. And you guys know those stories. We're going to talk about those on Wednesday. Everything that is lost is sought out. Right? It doesn't stay lost and the master say, I just don't care. Jesus will say in Luke chapter 19, verse 10, I came to seek and to save the lost. That's why he's here. That's why he keeps coming and talking to these ornery Pharisees. He keeps trying to provoke their hearts because perhaps many people will not listen, but some will. And Jesus says, I'm still here for them. In fact, I'm willing to die for those people. All right, you guys, thank you for your thoughts and comments this morning. We'll pick up in Luke chapter 15 on Wednesday.